Not long ago, a typical fairy tale looked like this. There was a hero and a villain. They fought, and the hero won. Everyone loved the hero, wanted to be like him, and everyone hated the villain. But everything has turned upside down. Now, the villain often appears in a very attractive way, and people are drawn to the villain more than to the hero. Villains are given second chances, their backstories are shown, and the reasons they became who they are explored. Heroes turn into villains, and villains into heroes. This is shown very well in one of my favorite TV series, Once Upon a Time, but it's everywhere. The Disney film Maleficent, the series Lucifer, The Vampire Diaries, Legacies, and many more. Did this trend really start recently? In many ways, everything new is just something old that has been forgotten. This kind of role reinterpretation has happened before. Many people have heard of Medusa the Gorgon. She's such a popular character that her image appears not only in Renaissance paintings but also on modern brands like Versace. Many know her backstory, that before becoming a monster, she was a beautiful girl desired by Poseidon. She refused him, and he used force against her in Athena's temple. And since one should not be angry at the gods, Athena took it out on poor Medusa and turned her into a monster, who was later killed by Zeus' son Perseus. The story is heartbreaking, but it has about as much to do with actual Greek mythology as the Quran has to do with the Bible. In other words, the characters are the same, but the story is different. In ancient Greek myth, the Gorgons were monsters. Their mother was Kito, from the Greek Ketos, meaning sea monster. Their father was Phorcys, god of the stormy sea. They commanded storms and were responsible for terrors in the ocean world, giving birth to monsters such as the Gorgons, the Grae, the Hesperids, the Sirens, and others. According to the earliest known version of the myth, written by the Greek poet Hesiod in his Theogony, Poseidon neither raped Medusa nor did anything in Athena's temple. Medusa looked like the monster she was. In all ancient depictions, she bears literal resemblance to a human woman. For the Greeks, the image of Medusa's head served as a protective talisman against evil. Of course, over the centuries, the Greeks themselves interpreted this myth differently, but the famous story of a beautiful girl who suffered injustice was written not by a Greek, but by the Roman poet Ovid. And needless to say, the Romans didn't exactly adore the Greek. In fact, much of what we know about Greek myth is already a Roman reinterpretation, very often stemming from Ovid, written many centuries after the myths first appeared. Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting shows Medusa as more of a victim than a monster already. Also, the snakes on her head are perhaps too realistic, even more so than in Caravaggio's or Rubens's portraits, in my opinion. Or take Luciano Garbati's modern sculpture, which clearly reflects today's interpretation. After so many centuries, Medusa finally becomes a woman, again, and takes revenge on Perseus, holding his head in her hand, a reversed version of Cellini's sculpture. But where does this sympathy for villains come from? It's not new at all. It has always existed. In ancient times, people worshipped figures who, by our standards, could be called villains far more often than heroes. The cult of heroes emerged later, flourishing in the Middle Ages, when tales of knights were beloved. Against the background of the sinless Christ character, the figure of the fearless knight who follows the law, keeps his word, and always defeats evil shines in full glory. But antiquity is something completely different. Before the Age of Heroes, take Greek mythology for example. Before the Olympian gods, the world was governed not by noble figures but by beings like Kronos, who devoured his own children. Out of fear, they would overthrow him. Even our famous Satan, villain of so many centuries, has begun in modern interpretations to acquire traits of kindness, compassion, even love. But these characters are human creations. Even when inspired by real people or characters, they are reshaped again and again for the centuries. We project ourselves into them, and since we all carry both a hero and a villain inside, ancient gods appear so human. They love passionately, burn with jealousy, become angry, punish, just like ancient kings. And that is why modern villains, despite their demonic traits, also possess positive qualities. We do have to understand the difference, though. Today, these characters are portrayed as people, In ancient times, they were not people. They represented the concepts of good and evil themselves. They were not a boy or a girl, but forces of nature. In pagan times, gods were born from nature. Anyone reading those myths can sense they are rooted in the natural world. That is why these gods are not sinless Christian figures. Nature has no mercy. It is harsh, and so ancient gods are harsh as well. People lived close to nature, praying for rain, fearing storms, hoping for harvest. Christianity placed a strong wall between humans and nature. The old gods became demons. Societies moved from huts to castles, tribes to nations and states. Ancient people recognized their helplessness before nature, but over time, through inventions and science, humanity gained a sense of power and began to desire dominion over nature. So the attraction to the villain, the one who, despite what happened to him, despite his mistakes, can still be loved and accepted, is understandable. It reflects our hope that despite our mistakes, we can still be loved and accepted. In that sense, the villain becomes more relatable than the flawless hero who never errs. The hero becomes unreal, distant, and feels like a stranger.